Yeah, and what about sanctions against against Putin, against his nearest people, against people near him? I mean, officials, for the most nearest his homologues.
Well, we've sanctioned a lot of the people near him. And so I'm happy that they continue to sanction people. Of course, it's the right decision. Ultimately, though, I don't know if that's going to be what changes the war. It's ultimately, if we look at the United States' history of sanctions, in the case of Cuba, in the case of Venezuela, in the case of Iran, in the case of North Korea, sanctions against Russia since 2014, we see that the reality is that they rarely change a country's politics. Sanctions almost never, I do not remember one time in American history where sanctions effectively changed the behavior of a country. They just don't. And so what I think would be a better bet is to analyze how it is that we can provide for Ukraine security tomorrow. I mean, if Ukraine liberated all of its territory, Crimea and Donbass, everything, what would prevent Putin from just firing missiles into Ukraine for the next decade and then make sure that Ukraine never has energy again? And you can destroy a country and not be invading it. And there could be not one Russian all of Ukraine. What would be the future be if there's never going to be security enough that there can be flights or insurance or investment? This is really a problem. So I think the real question we should ask ourselves, more important than most questions, is simply how do we stop Putin from doing that? And I think the only way we can stop him is to remove him from power.
Yeah, but put sanctions, I mean strong sanctions, make it impossible to finance this war for Putin.
I mean, the problem is he's not buying it on the market. There's nothing. What can we sanction? I mean, it's not coming from U.S. dollars. It's not coming from outside. Keep in mind, Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela, like many of these countries that are sanctioned, they operate in a black market. That's how they buy the Iranian drones. There's a black market that trades these things. For instance, the drug cartels in Latin America work with countries like Venezuela. They work with countries like Iran. Why is that? Because they're dealing with cocaine. They sell cocaine. That's the currency they use. So if you're using drugs, what can we do? Sanction drugs? We already sanctioned drugs. They've always been illegal. Is there still drugs? Yes, there's still drugs.
I got you. Yeah. One more thing. There was a meeting between Medvedev and Xi Jinping in China. So what shows us this political event? Does it mean something not good for Ukraine? I mean, some experts told that China made some decisions about Russia, not be rational, and I mean, before China was telling that they are not in the conflict, they are just watching how it's going on, and just gave the understanding to US that there shouldn't be any irrational steps. So now, could we tell that this position was changed, or it was another way?
I don't see any change in China's position. In fact, China just said yesterday that it was going to maintain all the banking sanctions of the United States. So I don't think that China has any interest in changing. China is ultimately motivated by money. If you look at its trade partners, the United States is infinitely more powerful and important to China's interest than is Russia. There's nothing. I mean, what could China possibly gain by upsetting the countries that have the most amount of wealth in the world? It would cost them a lot of money. For what? To be with the country that can't even win a war against its neighbor? It doesn't make sense. There's no strategic benefit for Russia to join, or sorry, for China to join Russia.
Yeah, but we could see this videos that some military planes from China to Russia was flying with some it was called military stuff. Yes. So don't you feel that this is really the aid for Russia?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be selling to Russians that are not sanctioned. There's a lot of things. And I think that China, though, values its relationship with the West more than it values relationship to Russia. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, Russia's economy is so incredibly small. I mean, it's really small. what would be the benefit of being close to a country that can't even do anything effective? I mean, there's no modern technologies in Russia. There's no, they have resources. Yes, Russia definitely needs resources. Aside from this, there's nothing else that it brings them.
But still, China buys a lot of Russian gas, so it's support of the war. Don't you think so?
I mean, perhaps they are trading something for gas, but at the same time, I think that ultimately China would never do something that would jeopardize its own interest.
Okay, and one more thing, Sternmeier urged that China could influence its influence on Vladimir Putin to bring peace in Ukraine. Will China use this opportunity?
No, I mean, I think that ultimately China most likely will play a role in the peace process, but whenever that comes, I think China will play a role, but I don't think it's going to be in the near term.
But is it the interest of China to stop this war as much as quicker?
No, not really. I think it's in China's interest that the war goes on for as long as possible. And it's destroying the Russian military, which means that then there's no natural enemy that China really has to worry about. Well, except if I don't think Japan's any threat for China, though they think it is. I don't think it is. And I think that ultimately the Chinese are interested most in what makes money. They're not interested in anything geostrategic per se.
So how much more money China gets right now thanks to the war in Ukraine?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not quite sure. But I will say that it's quite obvious that China knows that if Russia destroys itself, it does a few things. One, it takes away the military threat. Secondly, it would devalue the cost of housing, apartments, real estate in most places of Russia. So it'd be cheaper for the Chinese to buy investments. Because one day Moscow will come back. Moscow's not forever going to be under sanctions. One day it'll be, I hope, a normal city of some sort. And the Chinese know it's a good investment because right now the prices are incredibly low. And so the Chinese, if you remember how they've operated in other countries, including the United States and New York, for instance, they bought just tons of assets. They bought a ton of different properties. Why? With the hope back in the 1980s when the economy was doing badly, with the hope that one day the economy will improve and it'll be a good investment.
Yeah, and let's talk about position of Europe a little bit. We could see that Macron urged a lot of time that Europe should think about security guarantees for Russia, but he didn't tell anything about Ukraine's guarantees. What role Macron plays right now? Don't you feel that France plays its own game to protect its interests, or it can work out for Putin to start negotiations?
I think that in international relations, every country always plays its own game. That's the nature of what countries do. I mean, it's normal that you represent your own interests before anyone else's. In the case of Macron, his comments didn't really bother me that much. I think it's really sort of a misinterpretation. And the reason I say that is because Russia needs a guarantee. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, he didn't say that Ukraine would never join NATO. He said a guarantee. It could be a piece of paper. It could be France saying we personally guarantee that NATO will never use Ukrainian territory to attack Russia. Okay, that's a guarantee. Does that hurt Ukraine? It doesn't hurt Ukraine. It's nothing. It's words. It's just words. So I didn't find it to be that alarming. I think that was something that the French population perhaps. Maybe that in France today is a very interesting topic. Maybe they do think that the Russians need to be guaranteed something, and maybe that's why he did it. But as a whole, I don't think in any way it put Ukraine in a worse situation.
And what about NATO? Would NATO expand further in conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
No, not in the near term. I mean, I don't think that Ukraine is going to be able to join NATO for a long time. But I think that it's realistic for Ukraine is to get agreements, direct agreements, bilateral agreements, or multilateral agreements with countries like Britain, the United States, Poland, for their future security, that we'd have the same sort of mechanism as NATO, where it guarantees that if something were to happen, Ukraine would be offended by one of these outside countries.
Yeah, but how we should estimate the talks by Macron that Europe shouldn't rely on the United States much? What did he want to say?
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, they should build their own militaries. They're subsidized heavily by the United States. And so if they want to pay for their own costs, that's fine. I don't think anyone's against that. And the fact is, Europe is not ready to prepare. It's not prepared, sorry, to defend itself. It's not paying as much to the military as it should in order to have a competent military in face of a major war. And so I think it's a very reasonable point from Macron that the Europeans must take their own security more seriously and not just depend that the Americans will come and save them.
Yeah, I got you. So, and the last but not the least, Jason, how do you feel about the military aid to Ukraine? I mean, defense systems, new defense systems. How rapidly could Ukraine get them? Because one Patriot system is far too enough to protect our country from such strikes.
It takes time. I mean, and it's hard to say. You know, the reality is when they decided to give weapons to a different country, it is quite a long process. Because they have to analyze how many do we currently need in the United States, how much do we need to defend our allies, how many more need to be ordered, how long does it take to construct them. It's a very long algorithm of questions. So I think it might take a little while. I don't think it'll be like months and months, but I think it's very easily 2 months or something.
Okay, I believe that our victory not far from its way. So thank you, Jason, for this interview.